Brace yourself for the crusade. Tattoo the Earth.
All right. Welcome to episode 1 of Podioslave Tattoos the Earth podcast series. I'm your host, Anthony. I'm here with my co-hosts, Tony and Nate. And we're going to kick things off here with a special guest, the one and only Scott Alderman. Scott, you are the founder and creator of the Tattoo the Earth Fest. Welcome back.
It is true. It's great to be back, guys. It's so great that we've put this podcast together. I had this idea once we got the show together in August, and I'd done the podcast with you guys, and I thought you guys were perfect for it. So the idea was just sort of a limited series, different episodes, couple episodes, the beginnings of it, the idea, what it was like on the tour, and then interviews and stuff with bands in 2022, and just tie it all together.
Hell yeah. And we've got a couple things that surprises for you up our sleeves, in the coming weeks. And this episode is chock full of people. So really excited to tell the story of, the original Tattoo the Earth in 2000 and then back now, coming in August 2022.
Some of these people in episode 1, some of them were one of them was literally in the room when I said Tattoo the Earth and what started this whole thing in the book, and the people who were there right at the beginning, and Kevin Lyman, who was a competitor at the time. So it sort of has a lot of different people giving a whole overview of the thing. It's great.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like a behind the music on your whole vision coming to life, and then coming back to life with this whole experience. And we're, to be honest, we're honored to be part of it. In fact, this coming together is very reminiscent of the book. It's like we just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and he said yes, and we were like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how it works. So I'm really glad that you guys are able to do it. And I shared with you via email the advice that it's carried me for 40 years was don't fuck it up. And it doesn't seem like you fucked it up. So that's good.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
All right, we're going to kick things off with our first conversation with Naomi Fabricant. Naomi was the press liaison and head of tour production for the original Tattoo the Earth Festival back in 2000. So she was behind the scenes watching all the shenanigans, and we're going to get into that right now.
Naomi, thank you for joining us for this kind of retrospective episode to start off our Podioslave Tattoos the Earth. We really appreciate talking with you.
Oh, thanks for having me. It'll be fun.
Yeah, we're getting this together. We're talking to a bunch of people that were there in the early days in the year 2000 for the original Tattoo the Earth, and you were one of those folks. What was your first reaction when you heard the idea?
So it's a bit of a story. I was working for a concert promoter down in Miami, and part of my job was to go through the mail and make piles, like throw out maybe, or you definitely have to see this. And when I first read the pitch book for Tattoo the Earth, I was blown away. And I put it on the top of the you have to see this pile.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, so the promoter I was working for also loved it. And we flew Scott down. And once you meet Scott in person, it just took on a whole new life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
So my first reaction to it was like, this is the craziest, coolest thing I've ever seen.
I would think, we were much younger at that point in time, and all of us were, but I think at that point in time, context of the era is also key. Tattoos are not what they are today, right?
It was still very much underground, very much thought of as only like bikers and, outlaw types had tattoos, There were many states where it was still illegal to tattoo. So it was like a really super like radical, crazy idea, but it was brilliant. I thought it was just brilliant from the get-go.
So you kind of alluded to it. You flew Scott down. He's a great salesman. And from there, right, something happened. So basically from there, it was a good conversation, a pitch deck, visual, verbal meeting, and it was a handshake deal, or how did that go down?
No. It was not anywhere that easy. So the promoter that I worked for loved the idea, but felt like he needed to do some due diligence. And he got like, you need to give me a year or so. And Scott felt a little bit more compelled to get it done quicker. And so the meeting went great in that he got validated by a major promoter that this was a great idea and viable and it could happen, but he wasn't like locked into anything. So he pursued other avenues with agents and promoters to see if he could get it going before the promoter that I worked for was willing to. And I was so blown away or enamored by the whole concept that I wound up leaving the concert promoter and I wound up helping Scott launch this crazy idea. And I think it's in the book where we talk about the dysfunctional family picnic, saying it was like the most amazing non-tour tour ever, because we had set up at Jones Beach Amphitheater, like we had a tent and we had tattoo artists tattooing live, like first time people tattooed outside live, right? And it was like Korn, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I don't even remember who else was playing, but it was Howard Stern's thing, and it was packed. And like I walked away for a minute from the booth where we had like back then you actually wrote your name in a book and like a phone number to contact you, right? And so we had this sign up book, and I walked away. I think I walked over to the stage with Scott for a minute just to see what was happening at the stage, because we were by like the vendor area. And we came back and we couldn't get anywhere near the booth. Like the line was so long to just get up and sign up for this crazy like win ticket to a tour that did this. But we were like, if you sign up, you can win free tickets to Tattoo the Earth. And like,
Wow.
mad crazy people were signing up, watching the artist tattoo, and it was like, I don't even know what's happening here, but something is happening.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, and then you're coming from working kind of in the industry, but probably not the same idea, right? I mean, your job with the independent promoter had to be a little different than what you ended up doing with Tattoo the Earth.
Yeah, I mean, we did really big stuff. Like when I was working for the promoter that I worked for, I mean, he was the first one to bring Andrea Bocelli into the U.S., and we did Lenny Kravitz shows. We did a bunch of shows with Whitney Houston, who was still alive at the time. He did like tours with Springsteen in Europe, and like, it was really like big stuff, but it was, the same thing. It was, booking an act, booking a venue, selling tickets, and having a show, basically, right? And when I saw Tattoo the Earth, it was like, for me, it was something like almost more experiential, if you will, and it hadn't really been done like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was counterculture on all fronts, whether it's the tattoo stuff, whether it's the music itself. I mean, certainly Ozfest had kind of happened, but also just the way that it went down, it was very DIY. So, yeah, talk about that. You just got a reaction out of that. So what?
Lord. So I had nothing to do with the routing. And, the way it went down was trying to get the tattoo component to be allowed to happen caused us to have to be in what we've referred to as alternative venues. So God, like we dubbed it the Caravan of Pain for a reason,
Yeah.
And like just probably one of the best examples of alternative venues was we played in it was like a tennis dome in
Yep. And it was really hot, right?
Oh my God. So like they pressurize it, right? So in order to load in, you have to open a garage door, push all your shit into this like holding area, close the door, and then wait for the other door to open because everything was pressurized. So like just the load in itself was miserable. And it was never meant to hold a lot of people because it was just to be used to play the games. And, so we had like thousands of people in there and people were throwing up and like,
wow.
It was horrifying. And they're like, don't load the pyro, guys, because you'll blow a hole in the tennis dome and it'll be like.
Actually, that's a good point. Did the patrons, did the fans have to go through that same protocol?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
we're-
Wow.
yeah. So just like such a crazy thing. And like we got in all kinds of issues with the police and our artists, like when Philip Blue, they claimed that he didn't have a proper visa. So once I heard the police were coming for Philip and Titine, I had to like rocket in to get him. And it's like, I'm waiting and it's like, I got to wait for the door and depressurize, wait for the next door and run over to Philip and be like, grab your shit, let's go. And try to get him out through the crowd and back out of the pressurized doors onto the bus. And like, anyway, it was just like a lot of the venues were like that. Like there's a story in the book about when we played Mercedes, Texas. I don't know if you heard about that one, but that one was pretty great. We played outside at this like sort of festival grounds, and we set the tattoo village up on like a pavilion pad, right? So it was like beautiful. It was like a concrete floor. We had power. It was covered. It was like going to be cool enough because of the way the pavilion was situated that the sun wasn't going to hit the artists. And we had the local DJ from the #1 rock station in Mercedes, Texas, being tattooed live on the air.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Jeez.
Get all his reactions. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had given Sean Vasquez a radio and I said, all right, everybody's set up. You're all set. You got everything you need. I'm going to go back to the production trailer and just check on things. So I'll come back, but here's a radio if you need me, right? So I don't know. I turned around, I walked away, and I'm halfway through the field, and I get a call from Sean, and it's like, Nay, help, flood.
Jesus.
And I'm like, what? I mean, I was gone for like 2 minutes. And I turn around and go back, and there was a flash flood. Like, how does that even happen?
Wow.
Like, out of nowhere, a flood. Like, I'm like, did you electrocute the DJ? Like, the DJ okay? But anyway, so the entire village got flash flooded out, and we had to move all the artists onto tour buses, and we had to sterilize the tour buses so that they could tattoo on the tour bus because we had a flash flood. Like, who knew?
Wow. That's wild. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, just there had to be, it sounds like an action movie half the time. You're like grabbing people and trying to run them out of the back door while people are chasing you through the crowd. It's like a Bourne movie. And then you're in the middle of, Texas, and it starts pouring and you got to move to higher ground.
No, listen to me. It didn't start pouring. There was I don't even know how flash floods happen.
Wow. Jeez.
It just, and we were at the very tip of Texas, like, where the very, very bottom point of Texas, that's Mercedes, Texas. So I guess maybe they have flash floods. I've never experienced one until then.
That's crazy.
And then in Arizona at the Manzanita Speedway, sitting on the tour bus, looking out the window, I think Seven Dust was on stage, and I'm looking out the window, and I don't even remember who was on the bus with me at the time. And I'm like, what is that? And I'm like, I don't know. And we got off the tour bus and it looked like a tornado.
Oh,
but
no.
it was I forgot what they call them. It's a dust. It was a sandstorm. And I'm watching this like red cloud of dust that looks like a tornado coming right at us.
Oh, Jesus.
And yeah, so that blew like right through the Manzanita Speedway. I thought it was Lejeune that was on stage, but Scott corrected me, and I honestly can't remember who it was that was on stage at the time. Like, but it was pretty bad. There was a band on stage performing as this dust storm tornado blew through, and like they were covered in like red dust afterwards. We all were on the bus.
It couldn't have been Slipknot in their masks, which that would have helped them in that situation.
Yeah. I wasn't Slayer either. I really thought it was Seven Dust, and I thought it was Lejeune that got it bad. But Scott told me it wasn't him, and I honestly don't remember who it was that was on stage. I don't think it was Mudvayne. I don't know. Maybe it was Sepultura. I don't know. Anyway, it was one of the bands, and it was pretty bad. But everybody survived. Nobody died. It's like we all, thank God, we're good. So, yeah, the alternative venues proved to be extremely interesting. And then, in Boston, it wasn't even legal at the time to tattoo. So we didn't even tattoo. They wouldn't, we weren't allowed. So it was interesting that they booked the show there, knowing that the tattoo component was coming along and we weren't even able to tattoo.
Man, I'm getting anxiety just hearing these stories, and it kind of.
There are so many. I mean, I don't remember if I'm sure Scott put this in the book. It was in the book about Giant Stadium and Metallica, and we were not allowed to set up the village there because this is going to be a podcast, so I don't really want to start naming names, but just to say that there was a really nice motorcycle organization who's involved in the tattoo world, who apparently we didn't get the proper blessings from, and you needed to get the blessings, especially them. It was that blessing, and you had to respect that. Like it was part of it. Like you just had to show respect, and it didn't happen. And they showed up and made it a point to let us know that it didn't happen, and so we weren't able to set up the village at Giant Stadium, which was like our biggest show, but the concert was able to happen. We just couldn't tattoo or set up the village.
Wow.
So we did do Metallica at Giant Stadium, which was amazing. Like Scott and I, we walked out onto the stage and we were just like looking around going, can you believe like we actually pulled this off? Like Tattoo the Earth having Metallica Giant Stadium. Like, how crazy is that?
Wow. Insane. That's a good point, actually. It makes me think like, high risk, high reward. So you're kind of on a limb every single day, completely going with the flow. How does that compare to the job previous? I mean, you were an independent promoter, you're sorting mail, you're in the office, there's no hurricanes or dust storms going through, there's no, near-death experiences on the daily.
Well, I did marketing. That was my background. That's how I kind of like, my background's in the music business doing production logistics. And so I was doing marketing for the promoter, and, there were all kinds of crazy things that happened, like huge artists that decided it was too cold, so they wouldn't get on stage and perform to a sold out show. But
wow.
So there was always kind of dust storms in the music industry, because that's just the way it goes. But it was actually different kinds of budgets, like when you're on like a Whitney Houston tour, which I didn't tour manage or anything, but I did marketing for a few of the shows that he had. It's a completely different set of circumstances than Tattoo the Earth. I wouldn't say low budget, but it was a pretty meager budget that we had as far as, catering and, the assets that go along with a major tour. Ours were not very glamorous.
Right.
Were basic. And, we wound up firing our caterer after like the third show because they were horrifying. And, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was as crazy behind the scenes as it felt reading the book and hearing Scott talk about it in places with us and other places too. It sounds like it was just as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah. And then 100%. I mean, it was crazy and probably one of the coolest things ever, because it was such a, I mean, the word that comes to my mind is monumental experience, because it was the first time that tattooing was brought really to the forefront as it being something that could be potentially mainstream. Even though like our acts were metal, it was still, we were out on tour, and it was the first time tattooing had been included in anything even close to that. So it was kind of beautiful. And for me, like I lived on the bus with the tattoo artists, and that was interesting in itself, but we had such amazing artists like Philip Liu and Titine Liu, who are just such beautiful souls, beautiful people. And listening to them talk with Sean Vasquez and Paul Booth and Bernie Luther were some of the most beautiful conversations just about art and culture and why they tattoo, how they got into tattooing. I mean, Phillips was a legacy because his whole family were tattoo artists. but it was just, I would just sit there at the end of the night because I was always first one off the bus, last one on the bus because of logistics, you know. And by the time I got back on the bus, they were pretty much in, you know, like just in like these deep philosophical conversations about, you know, life. They'd all traveled like all over the world tattooing, and they were some of the smartest, most interesting people I've ever met, you know, and that was pretty great. It was definitely different than the other experiences I had had up till then in the music business. You know, now I work with Sully Erna, the lead singer of Godsmack. We started a nonprofit almost 4 years ago, and so I get to work with them, you know, primarily,
Nice.
but with the whole band. I've done a lot of different things since, you know, it's been 20 years since Tattoo the Earth, but that one was definitely different.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get to go. We were just at license age, and Nate chronicles a story when we had Scott on our podcast about basically trying to steal a car to go. Like, we wanted to go that bad to the Suffolk Downs date in Boston. But I think, yeah, I think it, like everything we've chatted about Scott and everything, you know, from friends and hearing from you, it felt very much like a large scale DIY basement show. So in your perspective, between the flash floods, the sandstorms, did you ever think like, shit, we're not going to get through this tour? Like, this, was there ever that moment?
I'm pausing to think about how to answer this because there was a moment. I mean, you know, New Jersey, when the motorcycle people showed up, was a little scary for a moment, and then we were in Milwaukee, and the venue, there wasn't room inside for all the tattoo artists, and we were trying to set them up outside because we had made tents, these individual air-conditioned tents for the artists to tattoo in, and the venue in Milwaukee where we were supposed to set up, the ground was all these like rocks, you know, and there was no way it was going to work. And so I'm outside trying to like look at the logistics of it and try to figure it out. And all the tattoo artists came outside and they surrounded me.
Oh, no.
And they're like, we're fucking pissed. We're not going to fucking take this. We're not you know. And I looked at them and they're like trying to intimidate me, you know? And I'm like, y'all are not going to hurt me. I already know you're not going to hurt me. So rather than like talk shit to me, why don't we figure out an alternative? Like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
So they were like all diffused. Like, they didn't know what to say. I didn't egg on a fight. I was just like, all right, calm down, people. Like, we'll get to the bottom. And so what they said they wanted to do was they wanted to draw. And I'm like, well, that's fucking cool. Let's do that. And on that show, although it was like sketchy, it was definitely absolutely quintessential DIY. We birthed one of the most beautiful art forms called the Art Fusion Experiment that night in Milwaukee. And I don't know if you know what that is, but what it was I got like these round catering tables and I leaned them against the wall and I got big clips and I got giant pieces of paper and a bunch of charcoal. And Paul Booth, Sean Vasquez, Philip Liu, and Bernie Luther each stood in front of an easel, and they each started a piece of art with the charcoal. And then every 20 minutes, they had to rotate into the next piece.
That's
and
awesome.
That's cool.
It was called the Art Fusion Experiment. It was some of the most beautiful artwork ever. And I'll never forget Paul Booth, who, I don't know if you know who he is, but all the stuff he does is very dark and like skulls and nothing pretty, right? And Vasquez does a lot of like Japanese stuff. So he did a flower. Vasquez did a flower and Booth had to rotate into Vasquez's flower. And he looks at Sean and he goes, oh, sure, fucking Vasquez does a flower. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this? And we're like, well, that's what this is all about, you know?
Yeah.
And it was such a great thing to just see them all kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit and create this art form. And art fusion became like a whole movement. Like people started doing art fusions on like surfboards, and just all over tattoo conventions started doing art fusions. And we birthed that on Tattoo the Earth, which was totally DIY and turned into something amazing.
All right, next we got Kevin Lyman. You might know him from the Warped Tour, another founder of a very iconic festival. Kevin was great. Talked to us about the, back end of putting on a huge festival. Obviously, he has a lot of experience in that regard. Stories about Scott and just a bunch of crazy insight on what it takes, and maybe some surprises in there too. So check this out.
Kevin, thank you for joining us for this, and we're really excited to kind of get your thoughts about the Tattoo the Earth experiment, because you were kind of in the same space at that time.
I mean, absolutely. I think it was very cool. Scott asked me I learned some things when he asked me to write or comment on his book or take a read of it and write something that I didn't know that I was one of the people that tried to shut him down at the beginning. So it was obviously, I think it was more of a, I love the industry where your agents say it's coming out of that person's voice, but they're speaking on your behalf, or when a lawyer speaks on your behalf and you don't know you actually said something. So once again, it was another moment that, when I read the part of the book where they said that, Kevin Lyman and Sharon Osbourne shut him down the first time, I was a little surprised because I had no idea that we were even in any kind of conversation. But I think, there's no reason there couldn't be something like this built again. I don't know if it turns in, I know they're talking about wanting to do a touring type situation. I think that could be a little tricky right now. I think, I think we've come a long way with understanding tattoo culture, where it's probably more acceptable than it was then. I just remember people were even trying to do tattoo shows in LA and they were being shut down and everything. But I think everyone understands that it is a professional business, and it's not what people used to do in the back of a tour bus on the Warped Tour when I told them not to get a tattoo, and then they'd come off the bus all wrapped up in plastic, and a couple of people ended up in the hospital with very, very bad infections. And all I could say is, I told you so.
Yeah, it's come a long way, right? 2022, much different than 1997.
Yeah, and I think with learning more about Scott and the situation he was in, honestly, I don't think he was probably in a personal position the first time around to be a successful festival producer, if that makes sense. He was challenged by some of his own demons at that point, who he's very, very honest about. And going forward, and I mean, I read that and was like, wow, that's a tough position to be in, because you're putting your whole life out on the line when you start these things. If you are susceptible to any kind of vice in the world, it's going to rear its head at that point potentially. He sounds like he's in an amazingly good space right now. He's also working with John Peters, who Mass Concerts, who has experience with this. I had lunch with him the other day when we were passing through Boston the first time. Nice. And I know that John's very excited about the project. So it sounds like they're in a good space to give it a shot. And I think starting it out as a one-off is probably going to be a smart thing to do first, and then see where it goes.
Kevin, you mentioned something, and I just maybe kind of jogged my memory a little bit. Scott launching this crazy experiment with Tattoo the Earth. You did something similar, obviously, with the Warped Tour. How did you find yourself putting that together in that same regard? It's a risk. There was no template, and you're just going to go ahead and make this happen.
It wasn't, I always say now that being a professor in college, I'm a full-time professor at the University of Southern California. I really put it all on the line, but I had worked 12 years making other people look good and understanding and taking I wasn't great at writing down notes, but I had a lot of mental notes on what works and what doesn't work. I was the first stage manager of Lollapalooza in 1991 when it was a touring entity. So I witnessed certain things on that tour that were in the back of my mind. Like when I saw Henry Rollins playing every day at 1:20 or 2:20 in the afternoon to empty seats, I said, if I ever get a chance to do this, wouldn't it be cool if Henry Rollins got to play right before Jane's Addiction then? And that kind of gave me my process of rewriting that lineup every day. So I was kind of taking this mental notes, and I had that production background. I'd put on a lot of shows for other people. I had that sensibility of a production background that I could speak to it and also figure out how to financially make it work. Not that it worked the first year, mind you. But,
that's probably,
But I think there was enough of the people saw that what my intentions were, and that they'd seen me do things in other settings that I had a good chance. I was allowed to fail and have a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
So you had some experience. So when you heard about the concept of Tattoo the Earth, late 90s, maybe someone who's relatively new to the industry, this counterculture tattoo thing, what did you think about it? You think it was crazy?
Honestly, to be honest, I was so in the midst of what I was doing at that point that I didn't pay much mind to it. Only thing I think maybe at some point, I think they were supposed to play a show that was right on top of us. And to that point, even with people like Ozfest and Warped Tour, we tried to distance ourselves from actually playing in the same city within a few days.
Oh yeah, sure.
There was that cooperation. And then that one time we did that Satan Meets Skating show where we actually did blended Ozfest and Warped Tour one time. We made sure that we weren't bastardizing the market, for lack of it. And I think only time I noticed it once, and I felt bad for them at that point because we were starting to hit our real stride as a festival, and they were within like a day or two of us in a market. And I was just like, who the hell would have booked that? And, I just like, who would have put that show there? Because I know when I started my tour, there was one point where we were very close to Lollapalooza in Dallas. And I was like, that will never happen again, because that established festival will crush the other festival unintentionally, with not even being intentional. So when I saw that, I think that's when I probably paid, more mind to it than anything. But when, people realize I wasn't, other than those type of things, I really tried to mind my own business because I had to focus on what I was doing at that point, because each year could have been my last if I, at that point.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like you, obviously, with your background going into doing the Warped Tour and then kind of being around other festivals and knowing where to put things, you were just really figuring that piece out. And then this other kind of Caravan of Pain, as Scott called it, just kind of sidles up along next to you and is like, hey, we'll play here 2 days before, 2 days after, because it's all we can get. You had to be like, man, good luck.
Yeah, and then you just started hearing some of you kind of felt for him, to be honest. I didn't know him really that well, but you felt for a guy because you started hearing stories, you just, oh my God, they didn't get to do that show, was canceled because no tattoo people could be there because there was no permits pulled, or that location pulled out, or you might have a show canceled because of ticket sales not being great that first year. I mean, I remember that 1995, I was in the same boat, but I think I got a pass from some people that maybe he didn't get that first year. And then the team, some of the people he were dealing with were probably the most difficult people I ever dealt with in the music industry. I've been very vocal about that. They were the people I had to later deal with the Mayhem Festival and some of the things I was doing there. And they were not the most cooperative people when you were trying to get something off the ground.
Yeah, it seems like, and again, this is just from chatting with a number of people like yourself and folks in bands, there's a lot of gatekeepers. And if you don't have the keys to that gate, that's where you end up in playing the rodeos, playing the golf domes and things like that.
Oh, I played them. Trust me, I played them. I try to describe to people sometimes, and people don't realize because that early generation. Now I see some of my friends who were around in '95 when I started that thing, and then where it went. We were playing established venues, and we had to work our way to those. We played every funky fairground, racetrack, side of ski slopes, wherever you could get a show in at that point. You had to take it.
Also, just recollecting on Warped Tour and this festival, Tattoo the Earth, do you think that, at some point when this was pitched and Scott was talking to you about this, that this was going to take away from Warped Tour? You kind of alluded to it earlier, but.
Well, I think they pitched what he did was and I only learned from the book that creative artists who were my agent and Sharon Osbourne's agent, some reason got involved and maybe, of course, used to kind of block it. They didn't need a third festival to book.
Yeah.
So they went to Dave Kirby, who really didn't have that experience in that world, and he picked up the festival. I had no idea this was going on, to be honest. I had not a clue that there was like these politics going on in the business.
And they're there too, right? I mean, they're in every industry. It's not just
they're still there.
Yeah.
They're there. They never go away. But I could probably tell you, and I don't want to, probably tell, I'm sure Sharon Osbourne, if she got wind of it at that point, she was very vocal about everything at that point.
Right.
She yelled at me a few times, and if I actually cared too much, it was intimidating,
Yeah. Oh man, no, and like I said, the politics are everywhere, and they they permeate most of the things that we do in this life, let alone just the music industry. And I can see you being the pop punk world being a little different than the tattoo world, but also having some intersecting points. Like you said, having people doing tattoos, in vans in 1997, 1998, whatever, before it became a little easier to do today. It's got to be something that you were like, was it something you ever thought you could incorporate, or was it?
No, never.
Okay.
No.
And here was the thing. Because we would do things like what would we have? Mohawks or mullets? And we would have things like you could get a mohawk or a mullet at Warped Tour.
Yeah.
Because tattoos to me should be, are a piece that's there with you forever.
Yeah.
It should not be impulsive. And how many people have gotten bad tattoos after too many nights in a bar? Or I've seen people having a fun night in New Orleans and they walk out with the Saints fleur-de-lis. I just, that we had a younger audience. We had a pretty young audience. And I was kind of like, wait, you know what? If you get emotionally caught up here, get a mullet or a mohawk. Your parents will just it's not something you may have to live with and go through a phase. And that phase to me was when I worked in the punk rock clubs of LA, to be honest. When I was starting out, I have no tattoos, but I remember every night at Fender's Ballroom, half the crew had to run half of their pay. We were getting like $75 to $100 a night back then. And it was cash. And they'd have to run across the street in Long Beach and pay the tattoo guy half their money that day.
Wow. That's
and then,
awesome.
there's a lot of people from my era that are running around with, Black Flag bars, the Addicts logo, circle jerks. That I didn't want them to come around with the worst, with the Warped Tour arrow going home with it, know?
Yeah.
And I did in where were we, in Atlantic City when we ended the tour in 2019. There was a lot of tattoo shots in Atlantic City. And I had quite a few people walk up to me and show me their new Warped Tour arrow tattoo.
Wow.
And I'm like, you're going to be like, 20 years from now. So I want, I think people need to think through their tattoos and what they really wanted. So I think we would have had a lot of impulsive people getting tattoos. And I saw it with the crew because we toured with Anthony Silverelli, who's a well-known tattoo artist from New York. He was on the first Warped Tour in 1995 with Civ. And he was, I think, probably the first person doing tattoos in the back of a tour bus.
Wow.
And then, Oliver Peck followed the Warped Tour around in a trailer. He was tattooing a lot of people. It was kind of like I had to wear blinders in some way, but I really also had to try to pay attention to my crew because we were in a dirty environment. It's great. You could do a tattoo in a very clean environment, but those people have to go out and work in a muddy field all day long.
Right.
And I think the worst story was we had one person on tour who got very infected and went into the hospital and was in like a semi-coma, but his girlfriend showed up to see if he was all right. But then another girl he was dating showed up. And I think he just kept his eyes closed for about a week.
Smart.
He didn't know if he could wake up or not and face the music. So, I had to just be really careful because the crew, and tattoo artists know that you can be as clean as you want it, but if the person goes into a dirty environment, and we Warped Tour worked every day in sweaty, hot, dirty environments.
Yep.
It's funny, like I can definitely see from your perspective not wanting to take on the tattoo side of it. Totally get that. I was just thinking, because we grew up with the Warped Tour, we grew up in the Tattoo the Earth. Like we were, 15, 16, and 2000. So we were very much the demographic. And we lived in both worlds. We were very much into the metal, very much into the skate punk, pop punk stuff. So we would have had to choose. So it absolutely would have cannibalized each other. So I can see how, maybe if Tattoo the Earth came around in like 2001, where you would have been like, well, shit, we need to defend the house a little bit,
Yeah, I would have said, let's stay apart. I would have probably paid much more attention to their routing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
I would have been paid attention to routing. There was room out there for fair price ticket. If you had a fair price, if you could do one in June and let's say come through Boston and one, Ozfest in June, Warped in July, and Tattoo in August, so people could, jam up their parents for some money or
Well,
whatever.
people would have gone to all three of those for sure,
Yeah.
especially if they're spaced out like that. But if they were like weekends apart, that would have been way more difficult.
We're seeing that in touring right now, how, there's so many bands coming through. There's a lot of people are having to make choices right now. Like, who am I going to see and what shows can I afford to? And I know that everyone has to make a decision now in talking to my students. Like, okay, I'm going to have to skip that band this time because I can't afford it.
Oh, and it sucks. It sucks, man. It always is like, oh, this band's here. Maybe you've got a couple of venues depending on the city you're in, and you see all these, things coming through, and you've got to make a choice.
They'll be playing on the same night.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll be playing on the same night sometimes. So, it's tricky. Everyone makes a living off of touring now. So, everyone's trying to be, that dollar becomes very important to people.
All right, next up, we have Mike Bellamy. He is a tattoo shop owner in New York City, Red Rocket Tattoos. He was there when Tattoo the Earth was formed. He was in the room when the idea came to Scott. So a lot of cool insight about the tattoo side of things right now with Mike Bellamy.
Mike, thanks for coming on to the podcast, man. Really appreciate it. And I know we're going to be jogging our memories tonight. So, but first, I kind of wanted to get, to know you a little bit more. Tell us about your business, your tattoo shop and whatnot.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that and the opportunity to speak. So I own now Red Rocket Tattoo in Manhattan, and I've been in Manhattan on 36th Street for 22 years. Had a couple of different partners along the way, and first one being Sean Vasquez, who was a big part of Tattoo the Earth. But it's been a ride, ups and downs, and many, many, many changes. And ever since, we got to Tattoo the Earth really soon in our career down there. Back in we opened in '98, and I think we got involved with Scott not long after '99, and then right before the tour. So it was very interesting days. We were all fresh and all about it, like ready to get going. So very exciting.
That's super cool. I used to live in New York City too, and back in '07, so a little bit after the fact. But my first tattoos, I can't remember the first shop, but the second shop was Fine Lines Tattoo. Might be.
Oh yeah, I know.
You know those guys. But I remember looking on the internet, and I saw your shop back in the day, Red Rocket. I was like, I should go to that one.
It would have been wild, Nate, if you had said, "Yeah, I got my first tattoo in New York at your shop." That would have been a little, a little magic there.
It's not out of the realm of possibilities. Like stuff like that happens all the time. It's so funny. It's that kind of business, really.
So you start with Sean. You guys open the shop, and you said '98. Then you get kind of involved and meet Scott.
Right.
You're hearing about this idea because, I mean, in the book, Scott paints it as he's being tattooed by Sean and says, I want to start something. I want to, tattoo the earth. And that's where it kind of comes to fruition. What are your first thoughts hearing about this idea?
I mean, I was in the room when Scott was talking about all that stuff in the beginning. Sean was tattooing him. And I have read Scott's book just out of curiosity. But for sure, he was a guy from the neighborhood that came across the street and was getting tattooed by Sean. And back then, it was pretty Wild West. It was newly legal in New York, so not a lot of people checking up on regulations. And I mean, we definitely were drinking and smoking and having good times back then. And Scott was happy to be a part of it, and Sean was definitely with that. Ideas flowed. I mean, they came and went, and we were all open, like really open to new things. That was part of the tattoo world, really. Back then, it wasn't like it is today, where it's, legal business. It's like corporate things. Everybody's got sponsorships, and back then it was the travelers and the gypsies and the creatives that were really just throwing their stuff around and really seeing what stuck. And in New York, it was underground and illegal for about 40 years or so. And it just opened up for about 2 years, maybe. I think it opened in '97, legalized again. And we had our shop a year later. So, everything was fresh. And along comes Scott, and it's like, well, fuck it, man. Like, let's do something cool. Mm-hmm. This sounds so weird and funny and like crazy. Like, let's do it. And Sean's not with us anymore, but Sean was very just raw and open and, just a really forward human being. So, he had that let's go do it and let's go try it out attitude. And that caught on. And Scott was a part of it. He had the same. And those two really hit it off. They clicked and pushed for it.
That's really cool. And I'm trying to recollect, like when I got tattoos, like it's a long process. Anyone knows that's gotten art, ink done knows that you're hanging out with, people like yourself for a good amount of time. So you really get to know each other, which is great. It's like part of it,
Exactly like that. It's someone that you do sit for a long time with. And it's very intimate because you're giving pain, receiving pain. There's a lot of trust in there and you want to distract yourself. So goofy talk comes out, esoteric, like everything. It's just, talk everything from God to politics to music and fashion and that jerk off down the block, like all of it.
No, it's really cool. I think my wife can relate when she gets her hair done. She's getting her hair done. She talks to this lady for like 3 hours, so it's similar in that regard.
And the longer you're there, the more that grows that. And say you have a continuing tattoo, your whole arm, your back, or more. Now you're seeing someone over the course of years. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a really big thing and sort of family for a while anyway. So very, very interesting way of living.
So you hear this idea kind of come to fruition, in the shop, you're hanging out, having a good time, like you said, you set the scene really well for that. Do you think they're going to be able to pull it off? Or are you like, no way, this happens?
It was pretty pie in the sky. And Scott talks very big right away. And at the time, he was definitely riding high and full of energy and enthusiasm and the whole thing. And he comes in with this attitude like, well, I'm a businessman and I want to, do the right business. So I'm staying at the plaza. And he would do things like that. And I'm like, all right, guy from across the block, like, good for you. Like, good for your suits and your briefcases and everything. But like, you're a guy that walked in here. And in that way, like, the tattoo shop keeps everyone on the same level because you're just a guy, and you want something the same as everyone. So, and he talked about like a Madison Avenue shop and things like that. And I did the math. It's like, who at that time, this is 98, 99, who at that time is going to plunk down $1,000 for a session or $1,000 at whatever they were trying to get for Madison Avenue rent? Like, I have a friend whose mom was in a store. It was 40 grand a month. And it was like 400 square feet. Like, you're going to do that with a tattoo shop? I never saw it, really. No. But I still don't see it on Madison Avenue. But now there's like Bang Bang down in Soho. It's like, it's ridiculous. So Scott was a little ahead of his time on that idea, probably.
Yep.
But I didn't see it for that day and age. So there was a lot of that. And then, didn't know Scott well enough to know that he would just like be stubborn, put his head down and push. And he sure did. He steamrolled everything and got it done. So,
I mean, we can relate. We've known him now for a couple of months and talked to him a couple of different times. And putting this together, it's like, we're just going to make this happen, guys. Like, yep, okay.
Well, it is. Yeah, there's no backing up with him. That's for sure. And that was the big, that was almost his mantra. It's like, it's going to work. Like, we're going to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of making it work, you mentioned Plaza. And then for anyone listening, Plaza, you're talking about the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan.
Hotel, when it was a 5-star hotel.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, it was like the hotel in Home Alone, right? In New York City.
Yeah,
I remember being like, oh, that's such a badass hotel.
And totally. And even earlier, there was a character named Eloise that was in a book that lived there with her aunt or something. So very famous place down from Central Park.
Yeah, I've been there. I've had breakfast there just to say that I did it back in the day.
I used to go to the bathroom there because you could just walk in and do it.
Nice.
New York, you got to find a place. There's not always a place. So you find your spots. And the Plaza was a good one.
Oh, I mean, it's clean. It's sterile, climate controlled. Basically the opposite of what you were doing on the road with this, right? 100%. You're going on the road with a tattoo festival where it's complete polar opposite of that kind of environment, which is supposed to be conducive to tattooing in the first place. So I mean, how did that come about?
The environments, yeah, that was pretty interesting. Rule number one on the bus, I was on it for like 3 of the shows. Don't shit on the bus.
Yep.
Because you can't flush it. It's like a septic tank and they have to dump it. And so you would pull into like a whatever donut house in the morning and there would be a line to the thing because, man, that bathroom was ugly. Unfortunately, that was one of the things that didn't really come off in the tour was the tattoo end and preparations for actually tattooing. Like, holy shit, like you went to Chicago and nobody had a license. They wouldn't allow it. They did. I know. And after reading the book, I know there was like scheduling issues and whatever for the tour, but they ended up in cities that one, you couldn't tattoo. So what are you doing with this? Like the whole title was Tattoo the Earth.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm coming as a tattoo artist and I saw it sort of taken over by the music bit. And like my interest was the tattoo part and the festival part. So when it really came to be, I was pretty critical of it, quick to point out like, holy shit, like you're trying to tattoo in a dirt area or a parking lot or like really unsanitary conditions. And I know they did their best and they got tents and they were really as good as they could be and cautious, like they wouldn't tattoo if it wasn't right conditions. So, they did the right things there. Over the years of tattooing at conventions, it's really awkward, crammed into an unfamiliar space with a lot of people and a lot of noise. And it's kind of the opposite of a lot of shops and how you can relax and settle in and communicate. And so I can't imagine on the road, like traveling and all of that. What a mess. I did a little tattooing. I tattooed on the bus once. That was, really cramped and awkward and just kind of like, not a lot of fun. The idea of it's fantastic, like, hey, rock and roll and let's do it. And you're getting with rock stars and up and comers. And like, there was really a lot of excitement on the show. Like Slipknot was just hitting, coming out like, who the fuck is this noisy band? And they really smashed it. And having Slayer like underneath them is ridiculous, but they did it. Yeah. Slayer killed it, amazing, and everybody else too. A lot of up and comers like Mudvayne and Head PE and Puya and stuff. Wow. So the energy was just crazy and masculine and concussive, and so noisy and dirty for tattooing.
Yeah, right. The tattoo piece, the outdoors. You're right. It's a different world doing it that way versus being in your shop where you're comfortable, where your stuff is, where you're gonna how the beats of the day go. It's got to be crazy to kind of get out of the van or the bus and be like, all right, we're gonna set up shop in this golf dome, or we're gonna set up shop in this field. This isn't normal.
Upper parking lot at Red Rocks, like in the dirt. Okay, like rad view, but like nobody was there because the music was over there. Yeah, back to the energy. Everything was just so fresh and fun.
Yep.
And you kind of have to, you give up to that. So you give up your comforts of home for the experience of like tattooing this guy on stage or something, like, yeah, I'll walk across the dirt lot in Phoenix at 100+ degrees, and get that guy and come back to the van. Like, yeah, it works good. It was fun. Nice. A lot of adventure, really. Backstage stuff for the artists. Like personally, I was able to go backstage or be on stage at Red Rocks where I grew up seeing shows, watching Sepultura play and be in front of house watching Slipknot at the end. Like what a treat to be underneath the whole venue and like, where you grew up watching your best favorite, the coolest shows you've ever seen. Now you're underneath it, behind it.
That's so cool.
What a ride. Yeah, hell yeah.
That's awesome.
Badass.
No, it's just a full circle moment to be there and, as a profession.
Yeah, truly. And to be, musicians have been getting tattooed forever. And to like now have some recognition come along with it, here's the guys that do the things, like they help make those guys look cool. Yeah. Like who did Kerry King's head? That's an important person. Everybody knows what his head looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. or even the Slipknot logo for that matter. That's essentially a tribal tattoo,
Paul
right?
Booth did that. Yeah, exactly.
Paul Booth. Yeah, he also, I think he worked on Chad from Mudvayne as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Sleeve. It's incredible to think of this whole, conversation, because now, since there's Incarnation, there's Muse Inc. in OC, which was Travis Barker's thing, which I think is now defunct. But so it really started kind of a new movement with this traveling tattoo music circus, which, like you said, there was a lot of trials and tribulations, but it's actually, there's multiple festivals that have emulated the same business plan.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, he wasn't off base, and it's kind of like, it's like any new thing. Somebody's going to get it, and everyone else is going to go, I don't know, man. And so he pulled it off, and here we are now.
Yeah, still talking about it today, 22 years later, with a show coming up in August.
Absolutely. It's not over till it's over. And same with Scott. He ain't over yet.
Nah, he's still going strong.
Absolutely.
Yep, the vision is strong, and the tattoo world, as you alluded to at the beginning of the interview, has never been more prevalent and mainstream than it is today. I mean, we were talking about with Scott, like, it's in commercials, it's every celebrity, it's more of a fashion statement to some. I know it's more of an art form for us, but it's taken on a whole new life, as you can probably attest to.
It absolutely has. And, going through things with, like you said, a fashion and how they picked up with Ed Hardy's designs, and that really just pushed tattoo fashion pretty mainstream after Gautier did some stuff and whatever. But yeah, here we are. It's everywhere. You can't watch a TV show without seeing it. The nurse has it, the grandmother has it, like everybody has something.
Yep.
And I think it's amazing.
And last but not least, we're going to end with a bang. We got Fran Strine. So Fran was the official tour photographer for the original Tattoo the Earth back in 2000. And the story about how that came to be is pretty wild. Fran gets into it. And he's gone on to do some amazing things in the movie direction, documentary direction, all that out in the West Coast. And yeah, maybe we'll have him on again. This is quite the conversation. Here is Fran Strine. All right, we're here with Fran Strine. Fran, thank you for coming on the podcast with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So, Fran, let's dial back the clocks. Were you the only photographer back in the original Tattoo the Earth tour back in 2000?
I was, yeah. It's funny. I'd kind of cut my teeth. I never had any formal training for photography or anything. I used to just take my camera to concerts, and back then, on the ticket stub, no cameras allowed. Now everybody's got an iPhone or whatnot, but I used to break down my cameras, like a Minolta X700 or whatnot, and lenses in my jackets, and just get in. And I was only taking pictures for memories. I knew not how to use a camera, so I just get lucky and get a few shots. And over the years, I learned the functions of the camera, f-stops and shutter speeds and whatnot, and kind of honed the skill in. Again, not to be a professional. I had no ambitions to be a photographer. But over the years, friends would just tell me, man, you got a great eye, Mm-hmm. And I was driving a forklift for a living at the time. This was years and years ago. But after a while, I started noticing that I did have a skill, especially now that I knew the functions of the camera. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it, am I getting any younger? Let me just try and see what I can do. So I would ship my photos to all these publications, right? And nobody really staffs photographers. Everybody's just a freelance, right? From Metal Edge to Hit Parade or Rolling Stone. And I got rejection letters from every one of them, except Sterling McFadden, which published Metal Edge magazine back in the day, was not in circulation anymore. They screwed up and gave me the editor's home address.
Oh, no. Wow.
Jerry Miller.
I see where this is going.
Yeah. She was just like, wow, this is a great shot. It was a shot of Alice Cooper, right? And I had no photo pass. It was just me squirching my way to the front row and getting some great shots and ducking out. And she wound up buying one of those images. And then she got on a phone call with him and asked me where I lived. And at the time, I lived in Atlanta. And that gave me a great advantage because all the photographers are vying for spots in Los Angeles and New York. And there's only a few spots to jockey for. Atlanta, not so much. It's open game. So she would hire me to go and shoot all these great shows, and after a while I had a great portfolio, but that led me to meeting Scott Alderman, the creator of Tattoo the Earth. I was desperate to get on a music tour. I'd never done one before. And through the band Seven Dust, who were dear friends of mine from Atlanta, through their agent, got me Scott's email address. That's all I had. And it was just a cold email to Scott Alderman saying, hey, man,
Wow.
I've always wanted to be on a tour. I'll do it for free. I don't care. Just get me out there and I'll give you everything, you know? And to my surprise, he emailed me back a few days later. He's like, do you have a portfolio? So of course I dialed up the best pictures that I had, sent it to him. And he hit me back up. He's like, if you can get your way to Portland, you've got yourself a bunk on the bus. I'm not going to pay you a dime and you're on your own.
Wow.
So I had no money back then. You know, I was just making minimum wage driving forklifts or whatnot. So I took a Greyhound bus from Atlanta, Georgia to Portland, Oregon. It took me 5.5 days to get there. When I got there, my legs were swollen like a pregnant woman. They looked like eggplants, just swollen and purple. It was a mess. And it was, I remember it was Stone Temple Pilots were the special guest, and it was at a horse track thing, you know. So I get there, I'm in shock. I'm like frazzled from this bus ride. I haven't slept in days, haven't eaten, and the gig's over, you know. And he's like, well, yeah, you may want to take. I was like, where do I take a shower? You know, I literally showered in a horse stall, dodging horse shit. Like, showered myself off, put on my clothes, found my place on you know, now they have Prevost, but they're just nice buses. But, you know, they had a shitty Eagle that was like diesel fuel was coming in and made everybody sick every day. And I think the next show was in Lawrence, Kansas, and Red Bull is one of the sponsors. And I'd never had a Red Bull in my life. I was so dehydrated and just wiped out. I probably drank 7 or 8 of them.
Oh, man.
It was just clipping the whole way there, man. Yeah. So that's how I got on this tour. Then, you know, it's been an awesome ride ever since.
So you heard about the tour, obviously, and when you heard about it, there's nothing really like it at this time. What was your gut reaction? Like, obviously you were intrigued to get to be part of it, but you think of the tattoo piece of it, and there's got to be some thoughts about, I can get some cool shots that way too, not just musically. But yeah, what was your gut reaction when you heard about it?
Yeah, you know, it was really cool, man, because Scott introduced me to everybody, right? Paul Booth and Philip Liu and Sean Vasquez, who became a dear friend of mine. He's recently passed. But they gave me carte blanche, man. They're like, all access, anything you want, unprecedented, like, just have at it, you know.
Nice.
So that was really neat. And Paul Booth was a little scary because he's so satanic and evil, but deep down he's really a sweet, sweet dude. And anytime I go to New York, man, he'd invite me to a shop, which is like walking to like the little shop of horrors, man. There's fucking skulls and baby parts and like literally and formaldehyde. It's just the craziest thing ever. But, you know, it was really unique, man. I'd never seen, and it was a shit show, man. If anybody reads Scott's book, Caravan of Pain, you'll see quickly that it was exactly that, just chaos, man. There was dust storms and nothing was sterile, and I wouldn't have got a tattoo, I can tell you that, but a lot of people did. And then where we couldn't do it, they would do these art exhibitions with chalk and paper and do these incredible, you know, drawings, you know. But it was definitely a different thing that I've ever been a part of. You know, I've never toured before, but I've been to a billion shows thanks to the Metal Edge and Rolling Stone and all these people, but never on a tour, man. It was, and then after that, touring with proper tours, it was really, really a shit show. Yeah. It's incredible that they did the whole thing. Like, I just can't wrap my mind around how they got it off the ground and kept it alive. You know, it could have been easily shut down, you know. And I got fucked up, man, really bad. You know, I had to go to the ambulance twice.
Oh, wow.
You know, wow. It was just insane. Yeah, there's a place called the Eagles Ballroom in Milwaukee. It's a great place to shoot because the stage is, you know, about up to here. So you got a great vantage point to shoot. Now, standing right in front of Kerry King, getting some great shots, and some giant heavy dude flew over the barricade. And at this point, I've graduated to a really nice Nikon, right? Like an F5 or whatever, but they were still metal. There was no digital back then. Ooh. And the eyepiece went missing days ago due to this tour because it was just chaos. So it's just a metal eyepiece, and this kid lands on my shoulder, and my face plants with the camera, rips my eyelid open. I look like Jesus. You bleed the most from your ear and your eyelid, right? I was terrified when I looked in the mirror. I'm like, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna bleed out. You know. So they rushed me to the ambulance, and they were gonna take me away. And I'm like, what time will you guys have me back? I was like, well, it's Wisconsin. It's, you know, almost 11 o'clock, probably 6 a.m. I'm like, I got to be back on this tour bus at 2. to go to the next city. So literally they just did a butterfly stitch, cleaned me up. They're like, the next city, have them remove this. And so I literally just, every city had a new butterfly stitch.
Oh, wow. And
that's how I healed myself. There were no paramedics to really take care of me or anything.
Yeah.
And then the other one was the band Amen. I'll never forget. It was in, I think it's El Paso, Texas, just 150 degrees. And if you've ever seen Amen, or if you know, they're like the Sex Pistols 2000 back then. They're just wild animals on stage. And Toomer, the bass player, that came out the first song, and he had one of those mic stands with a heavy 20-pound bell on the bottom. He kicked the mic stand. It hit me in the temple, knocked me out cold as a fish.
Oh, wow.
I wake up 20 minutes later in an ambulance with a concussion. And again, they're telling me, you got to lay low. And of course I didn't, I was there for a job,
Mm-hmm.
But those were the hazards of going out on Tattoo the Earth. And I saw stages catch on fire with Slipknot, and they had pyro, and Lawrence, Kansas, the stage almost burned to the ground. Like, just, it was gnarly, man, but the best time of my life. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
It sounds like you gained the respect from Casey Chaos at Amen and Paul Booth in terms of like the carnage.
Yeah, man, it was
earned your stripes.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a question. You kind of answered it, but just a little more depth, because you were doing shows before, right? So what was the big, I guess, goal for you to go on the actual festival? Was that just something like a dream of yours to actually go on a full on tour?
Yeah, because I would see these guys like my heroes, Niels Lozauer, Mark Weiss. I'm like, man, how cool does it have to be to go on one of these rock and roll tours? And that's what I wanted to do and do for a living, and make money at it, and you don't make a lot of money at it, to be honest with you, even if you are with an established band, and until you get with somebody like, I've toured with Nickelback and the Slipknots and Stain for a bunch of years, and they do pay well, like a lot of money. But that was it, man, just to get on a tour, and it wasn't until I met Niels Lozauer at NAMM, because I couldn't really support myself just taking live photos or even setup shots. I had a full studio setup doing photo shoots with Pantera and all these other Typo Negative back in the day and Metallica. But if nobody knows, like Metal Edge or even Rolling Stone, they'll pay you like $600. You can't live on $600 a month. You're selling a picture or two maybe. So I met Niels Lozauer, who was my, he did all the Van Halen album covers and whatnot, at an AM show, and he was kind enough to sit down and talk to me. And I'm like, man, how do you sustain living in this world? Because I don't know. Advertising shots. Go find the promotions guy for Gibson, Marshall, Ibanez. So I did do that. And then, as I established myself for my career, especially with the bands like Slipknot, man, they would request me to do their photo shoots for Guitar World or for their amps. I'll never forget, Mick Thompson was like, you want to come to Iowa, man? Shoot my Ibanez ad. We built this thing in his basement at his house. It looked like like a bunker in Poland with maps and knives and shotguns and rifles. So there was Code Red was the name of the ad. It had his new red Ibanez. And then, Jim Root, when he was out with Stone Sour, had recently signed with Orange Amps. And he requested me as well. And then, Slayer, it was all these bands that I met through the tour wound up calling for my services, and that's how I was able to put food on the table and really get my foot in the door. And once I did, I kicked it wide open and I haven't looked back since,
So basically you were doing it for the experience, but de facto you basically made some connections. So
the fun experience stuff of touring wears off after about 4 or 5 years, because you really can't keep a relationship. Yeah, you're seeing the world on somebody else's dime, but at what point does that get, seeing the same place over and over, especially in the States? No knock to the United States, but when you've done the A, B, C, D markets 20 times, toured for 20 years almost, that's crushing to your soul. It really rots your soul. And you'll ask anybody that. It's just like the touring really takes a toll on you. And that's, and thankfully to Tattoo the Earth, because I brought a Sony Handycam with me for nothing more than what I used to bring my camera to shows for just my own experience. Right. And that's when I learned about motion pictures. And I was like, wow, this is actually really cooler than taking a still image, because now I can kind of tell a story. And do my own narrative. And I was in the studio with Seven Dust. They were recording a new record in Atlanta with Butch Walker, who's now a super famous producer.
Mm-hmm.
And their A&R guy was there. So the last name was Roberts, but he saw me with my handy cam, you know, and like I said, I grew up with the band, like we're, you know, friends since we're teenagers. And I was just sitting there just filming, you know, and he came in and goes, "You do video production?" I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Yes, I do. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first. I didn't even, believe it or not, I didn't even own a computer. I've never owned a computer at that point. This was 2002 or 3.
Wow.
And he goes, "Can you get me a budget together? We wanted a 20-minute making of bonus DVD that accompanies the CD."
Oh yeah. Wow.
I'm like, "Absolutely, man." So I had a really good friend, Jen Rothland, who's a big time producer in the music world. So I called her up. I'm like, "Can you help me put this budget together?" She's like, "Yeah, $90,000. And I was like, $90,000?
Wow.
Today, even that's a lot of money. But back then, I was just like,
Oh yeah.
"Are you shitting me?" She goes, "No, record labels are spending so much money now doing these, you know, these digital content pieces because, you know, record sales were dwindling. So anything that they could get to get somebody to purchase a CD, they would spend the money on. So it's kind of like a loss lead for them."
Was this the Animosity era?
No, Seasons. It was even
Seasons for Seasons. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you buy that there's a digipack, right? So you open it up, there's a bonus DVD, and they became really successful. Like a lot of people really liked it and would post stuff about it. And then Nickelback took notice. You know, I had a lot of good friends at Roadrunner Records, so they brought me up to do an EPK with them and up in Vancouver for a few weeks, and Seether and all these other bands. And then I got I got the itch to do documentaries, and then I did more music tours. You know, I toured with Slipknot, 2 or 3 tours, thanks to Tattoo the Earth, Seven Dust. You know, they would have me out anyway, but you know, I did a few proper tours with them. Seether, a bunch of years. Well, Stained was my biggest employer. I worked for those guys for 8 years total, and did two making of, you know, documentaries in the studio with them, from the writing inception to the recording, mixing, touring, the whole deal. So it was that was fun, except for Aaron Lewis and I butted heads, you know, because politically we're on the opposite ends of the spectrum. You know, he's so far to the right. If he goes anymore, he's Alex Jones, and kind of like Bernie Sanders, I guess. But you know, so we would fight. And you know, there's another thing about touring, man, because it was still a family. I mean, we still go to dinner today and hang out when I see him.
So I'm curious, you grind it out in the Atlanta scene, you know, trying to get out on the road. You finally get out on the road. You're on Tattoo the Earth, which by anyone's measure is a traveling circus. Yeah. You got, you know, this loud music, you got sandstorms, you're getting kicked in the face, you're getting all this. So you finish the tour. What was it about it that you're like, I want to get back out there?
Because I heard from all the other bands what a shit show that was, and that's not how a proper tour works. And if I went out with like a real tour, it was so night and day, man. It really was. It was luxurious. We had condo bunks, which means, you know, instead of 15 or 12 bunks in a bus, there's only like 6.
Right on.
Room. You're not with a bunch of stinky people, and you're eating good food. You know, they for some reason brought out a vegan catering service. It was the worst. There was nowhere to eat, and everything was outside in a tent with flies shitting everywhere and like bugs, and it was terrible. And then when you graduate to working with like a Nickelback or a Dolly, they have, you know, a chef cooking with a menu like, what would you like today? Chicken, fish, you know. So that keeps you going. And then the pay, you know, like I said, I wasn't getting paid for Tattoo the Earth, you know. I gave my soul for that thing, but it would not have led me here. So I really do credit that tour for, you know, and some very special people along the way to put me where I'm at today.
Nice.
You know, the touring part, it was fun, man. There's chicks. All you got to do is have a laminate. You got chicks dripping off of you. Doesn't matter if you know, one eye in the middle of your head. If you got a laminate, you're in, man. It's the craziest thing in the world.
And you had blood dripping from your head, and you just need a laminate.
Scars, sunburn, food poisoning, you name it, man.
That's so good.
So I'm curious, as tattooing, going back to Tattoo the Earth again.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning. What is a typical, you get to the venue, whatever, what's a typical day look like for you at that point? Like you get up, like what are you doing to prep for that day, to take pictures or do whatever you're going to do?
Yeah, so I was usually one of the first people up because I was so excited because it was my first time. So I'd go load up the camera, just go start shooting, whatever it was, even exteriors of the tour bus, just for whatever, just so we had it, to them setting stuff up. And as the day progressed, it started early, like 11, 12 o'clock, the first band's on. So I'm out there shooting, man. I'm on the stage, side stage, in front of the crowd, in the crowd, just trying to jockey for the best shots I could get, and then with my video camera out, I'm, hoping none of the bands are going to yell at me, and I was super intimidated by Kerry King at first for some reason, I don't know.
Well, I can see why. I mean,
he's a brooding looking dude, man. And what was funny, and I didn't know this, man, but his wife was a dear friend of mine that used to come to Atlanta to visit another friend. So we knew each other for a while, and I had no idea they were married. So I think we're at the New York show and she was there at Giant Stadium. And I'm like, Aisha? She's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm on the tour. She goes, oh my God, I'm married to Kerry King, right? I'm like, I had no idea.
Wow, man.
So that opened up a friendship with Kerry. But the first time I met Kerry, I had a fisheye lens. I was trying to get a little close to him, and he kind of just looked at me. I'm like, I'm sorry. He goes, no, come on in, man. He had the big nail spikes, and he does the pose for me. And I'm like, okay, this guy's really cool. And then he's a big meat eater, man. So he and I would go to Ruth Chris every now and then and like chow on me. And, and Mick Thompson's still a dear friend of mine from Slipknot. He's a big meat eater. So we would just go destroy all the steakhouses,
Nice.
So talking about, recollecting on Tattoo the Earth, between the photos, inventory, shoeboxes of photos you have probably a ton of video footage. Going through that stuff, is there any like one moment that comes to mind that's like, man, that was a special time? I mean, you've made so many friends from the store as well, right? So yeah,
when I remember we were, Scott just posted a picture of this too, of a band called that Amen, right? We're in Cleveland, Ohio. I remember there was this giant tower, right, that overlooked the city. I was like, you guys want to climb up this thing? Take some good shots? And they're like, sure, man. Except Toomer, the guy that kicked me in the head with a microphone, is terrified of heights. But they made him climb up it, man. And we did the shoot, and the shot came out phenomenal. It's on the Tattoo the Earth Instagram page. You can go see it. But that was memorable for me because I remember how scared shitless that guy was. And he was white as a ghost, like shaking. You wouldn't look down. He's just like, my God,
You just described me, because that was exactly how I would react to that.
Yeah. He was really scared, man. It was funny. Yeah, that, and then all the Slipknot stuff, because those guys were insane, and I came in really early in the Slipknot camp before Tattoo the Earth with Metal Edge. I was one of the first photographers ever to shoot them, and became fast friends with them. And anytime they would play, they're like, fucking just jump on stage with us, dude. Just watch your back,
Nice.
So I would be up there dodging around these idiots with their fucking baseball bats. They're not paying any attention to where they're going anyway. And they're puking in their masks. You're dodging puke and piss and everything else. And they were so fun to shoot, and still are,
And that's no joke. I mean, look at early footage of Slipknot. Like the fact that Corey Taylor can still walk,
right,
is a mind fuck.
Kidding me? It's like any of these guys, and they never used to wash their outfits, so it'd smell like Bourbon Street, literally. Never washed them. They're like, we're not washing anything.
See, that's the stuff we love on this podcast. I mean, we wouldn't even have thought of that, and the fact that you said it's like, all right, well, that likely happened.
Yeah. They never washed their outfits or masks, nothing. It was disgusting.
I can't even imagine. You have a show in 100-degree heat or whatever, wearing all that shit, and then you just kind of let it sit overnight and put it on again the next day. Thanks.
It's funny. Like, you never know where anything's going to take you. I mean, we've been doing this podcast for a couple of years, and just the journey. I mean, it led us to chatting with you and linking up with Scott. And you just never know. And it just takes you putting yourself out there.
Yeah. I've never lost contact with Scott either, man. I'm so grateful for the opportunity he gave me, and I just feel indebted to him because he's really the catalyst that got me to where I am now as a filmmaker, and I just, if anybody gives a shit, my new movie just came out via Sony Pictures Tuesday on something that's not heavy metal at all. It's a guitarist named Ray Parker Jr. who wrote the Ghostbusters theme song. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, but nobody knows his early career, so it's kind of like an unearthing of the genius guitar player this guy is.
All right, that wraps up episode 1. That gave us a great behind-the-scenes look at some of the things that went on at Tattoo the Earth back in 2000, with, insight from Naomi about being on tour, and hearing from Mike, who was in the room when the idea was conceived, Kevin Lyman, who was in the space at the time, and Fran, who was making his way as a photographer and now has obviously gone on to do other things too. So really exciting to talk to those folks. Next week, we have Derek Green of Sepultura and Myron from Workhorse Movement, who were on the 2000 tour. So we've got a couple of artists that played the Tattoo the Earth stage in the year 2000. So stay tuned for that, and we will be back next week with Podioslave Tattoos the Earth. Thank you for listening to Podioslave. We are at Podioslave on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the places that you can find us on social media. Facebook, Podioslave Podcast. YouTube, Podioslave Podcast there. Email us at podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. And hey, if you want to become a supporter, click on the link at the bottom of the episode and give us $1, give us $5. It keeps the lights on, keeps us going. We really appreciate that stuff. Thank you.
I got to tell you about me delivering all the photos to Scott real quick.
Oh yeah, no, give us that. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm in Atlanta, and Atlanta was the hub for AirTran back in the day. And if anybody remembers AirTran, that is the airplane that went down in Florida and killed like everybody on board. Like the plane just went down. I don't remember why, but it did. It killed everybody. And only about a month or two later was when I was going to go deliver these to Boston to Scott. So I had everything in a giant shoebox, as you said, like thousands of slides, like 2 or 3 of them packed in a suitcase. I get on board, I kind of put on my sunglasses, my earbuds, and I'm going to lay back and fall asleep before the plane takes off. And I can feel it taxiing off. And then I start smelling burning plastic.
Oh no.
The plane comes to a stop and smoke starts billowing in. The doors open, the slides come out, and they're like, everybody out, and they're trying to do it orderly. I get up. The only thing I'm thinking about is rescuing those slides in case the plane burns to the ground. So I'm getting yelled at by the staff. I'm like, I'm getting these fucking pictures off. This is my life. This is it. There's no duplicates. So I grab them, slide them down, call Scott, and he's like, well, you want to just get on the next flight? I'm like, dude, I almost died. If this thing would have taken off, we would have all died, period. Like, no, I'm not getting on a flight today. I was so shook up, man. I didn't get on a plane for about a week. So I was like, I'll see you next week or whenever I can get up there. But yeah, he almost didn't get his slides, man, from that whole tour, because it was a scary moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
They had no backup. That's, again, context is key. A different era, completely different era. And,
yeah, now all my movies, man, they're on like, I don't know, double 38 terabyte drives because everything's shot in 6K now, so the redundancy and how cheap this stuff is now. I remember when I was doing the Seven Dust bonus DVD, I mean, there were like 256 gigabyte drives that were like this wide and this tall,
which is nothing.
Nothing.
I'm holding up 2.5 years of the Podioslave podcast right now. This is it. It's this tiny little terabyte drive with a bunch of YouTube videos and episode audio, all that shit.
That's crazy, man.